It's definitely not looking like it, but scientists haven't been able to make sense of it either. What do you think is causing this behavior? What's happening in
Some frightening moments caught on camera yesterday at Yellowstone National Park. Take a look at this. A massive hydrothermal explosion sent visitors running for safety at the park's popular Biscuit Basin. The eruption caused extensive damage to the board.
Listen to me carefully. Something is happening under Yellowstone. And I'm not talking about the usual geysers or hot springs. I'm talking about perfect holes forming overnight, pools glowing blue where there was nothing the day before. And now the animals, bison, elk, wolves, they're leaving the park in numbers no one's ever seen. People are saying it's normal migration. Locals are reporting a low hum at night that makes their windows vibrate. And there are rumors, whispers, that what's moving beneath Yellowstone isn't magma. It's something older, something deeper. You think I'm exaggerating? You won't by the end of this. And if you still do, just check out the news. It started earlier this year when geologists confirmed a new hole forming in the Norris Geyser Basin. They called it a vent, about 13 feet across, appearing seemingly overnight. To the public, they said it was a normal hydrothermal event, superheated water and steam forcing its way to the surface. But satellite photos tell a stranger story. The hole wasn't jagged or uneven like most steam vents. Its edges were clean, almost perfectly circular, and the discoloration around it suggested a sudden, intense heat event that scorched the soil in concentric rings. Then a few weeks later, another anomaly appeared. This time it wasn't just a hole, but a pool, a luminous pale blue thermal pool where there hadn't been one before. Again, the explanation was that a small, mildly explosive event had opened up a new surface feature. The pulses weren't strong enough to register as seismic activity, but they were consistent, like a heartbeat deep underground. And then the animals began to move. It started small, reports of elk herds migrating earlier than usual, bison showing up miles from their normal grazing lands. But soon, the stories grew stranger. Tourists caught video of bison stampeding down park roads, not stopping for cars or barriers. Wolves abandoned active dens with pups too young to travel, yet they fled anyway, heading far beyond their established ranges. Birdwatchers documented massive flocks of ravens spiraling into the sky over the caldera, forming strange patterns before dispersing to the north. Even fish in Yellowstone Lake were seen leaping repeatedly near the shoreline and then washing up dead in small clusters. Park officials suggested the wildlife was reacting to minor tremors, but the official seismic records for that period show nothing strong enough to explain such widespread and coordinated behavior. Behind the scenes, things were changing. A breach event isn't language anyone familiar with Yellowstone's geothermal system would use lightly. It implies something coming up, not just steam or water, but perhaps gas, material, or even something structural. Visitors camping near restricted zones began reporting odd phenomena. Some claimed to hear faint clicking sounds at night, like stones tapping together. Others said their pets refused to go outside after dark, whining and pacing nervously inside tents and cabins. One camper wrote on a forum that he woke to find dozens of deer standing silently in a circle around his campsite. They didn't run when he shined his flashlight on them. They just stared, eyes reflecting pale silver, until they all turned at once and vanished into the woods. At first, I assumed these stories were exaggerations, people scaring themselves in the wild, but then I found a series of thermal satellite images taken over Yellowstone during the weeks the new features appeared. Each image showed faint heat signatures radiating outward in concentric rings from the caldera, not random, but evenly spaced, as if something deep below was pushing up in a deliberate pattern. When I compared the positions of the holes and the blue pool, I realized they formed a rough crescent. Extend that arc, and the next likely breach point falls just outside the park's southern boundary, not far from tourist-heavy areas. And then there's the matter of the old reports. Could the current anomalies be tied to whatever they found down there nearly a century ago? Skeptics argue that such stories are nothing more than urban legends among park staff. But if that's true, why are sensitive areas being cordoned off so aggressively? A technician who worked on geothermal monitoring stations posted anonymously that he and his team had detected subtle but rhythmic pressure pulses underground. These weren't typical steam releases or collapses. The pulses came in sets of 3, spaced precisely 18 seconds apart, and repeated every 2 hours. He called it too perfect to be a natural cycle. Now, park authorities are downplaying the situation. They say animal migrations are normal, the new features are nothing unusual, and the expanded closures are for visitor safety during routine maintenance. But people living near the park aren't buying it. One resident described hearing a deep, almost imperceptible hum late at night. He said it wasn't loud, but it made his windows vibrate. Another claimed to see faint blue lights glowing above the tree line miles from any known thermal feature. Even more disturbing, some visitors have reported brief power failures in their RVs and cell phones suddenly losing all service near certain park entrances. Could all of this have a mundane explanation? Possibly. Yellowstone's geothermal system is complex and always changing. But what if this time it's different? What if these small, quiet events are early warnings of a larger shift, one we've never observed before? Perhaps it's not magma rising, but something else, something older, deeper, and more deliberate. The animals seem to know. Maybe we should start paying attention, too. I'm not really sure how to start this because my hands are still shaking as I type. I've been in law enforcement for 14 years now as part of the Montana Highway Patrol, stationed out of Great Falls mostly, though I've done stretches in Helena and once filled in for a colleague near Billings, and I never thought I'd be writing what I'm about to tell you. I was heading home on my day off, actually, to see if I could grab an early dinner with my cousin who was in from Missoula. He's not around much because he's super busy with work, something to do with forestry management logs that I never fully understand. Anyway, I was taking a back road off Highway 20 near the Highwood Mountains. That route has a pretty patchy radio signal, so I always keep my police scanner turned down low since it tends to pick up random bursts of chatter. I couldn't help but notice a faint light up on a hill that usually doesn't have any buildings, aside from an old radio tower that sometimes transmits local stations. That tower is a bit of a relic. I've stopped by it once or twice during the winter to check on stranded drivers who said they saw a beacon in that direction. The area is so remote, and the land is mostly used for grazing. I remember thinking the glow was awfully bright tonight, almost like one of those old spotlight beams you might see in Helena during the big parades. But from the angle, it looked too high to be coming from the tower's small maintenance shack. I decided to slow down and pull off on a narrow gravel path that runs up a slope, which leads pretty close to the tower. As I turned the corner, my headlights tilted up the hillside, and I distinctly recall the smell of burnt pine for some reason. There was a substantial wildfire in that region back in 2021, so I'm guessing maybe some of the charred wood never fully recovered. Anyway, I sometimes get fixated on these details because I'm used to scanning my environment as part of the job. Old habits die hard. The road was in rough shape, full of dips and loose gravel, so I took it slow. About halfway up, I saw that the light I'd noticed was flickering, almost like it was being blocked intermittently. That was strange because I've only ever known the radio tower's light to be red and steady. I kept driving, trying to make sense of it, because it didn't look like a typical malfunction. The closer I got, the more I realized the flickering was caused by something. No, someone, or I guess something, actually moving around on the platform near the top. The tower's not all that tall by modern standards, but it's at least 60 or 70 feet high, with an older style catwalk about halfway up. The caretaker's shack is always locked. I checked it once during a winter storm warning, so in my mind, I'm thinking maybe a teenager or some misguided hikers climbed it for a thrill. But as I eased my car nearly to the tower's base, I angled the headlights up, bracing myself to step out and investigate, never suspecting I was about to see the impossible. I turned off the engine and left the headlights illuminating the tower. Right away, I noticed one of the cables was shaking. The wind wasn't particularly strong that night, so that set my nerves on edge. I unlatched my door quietly, force of habit, and got out, shining my personal flashlight upward, which was nearly out of batteries. I keep forgetting to replace them. The beam wavered, but it was enough for me to see the outline of something massive perched on the catwalk. At first, I thought it was a large bird, maybe a hawk or an eagle, but it was far too big, far too thick around the torso, and there was this shape that looked almost human, with broad shoulders and a head that wasn't quite right. When I say massive, I don't use the word lightly. I've been around big creatures in Montana, grizzlies, moose, you name it, and this was bigger, at least in height, though maybe not as bulky. It looked like it had exceptionally large wings folded along its back, not flapping, but kind of shifting in the wind or adjusting its balance. I could make out legs that seemed bent and gripping the metal rails. In that brief moment of shock, I recall my chest tightening, like that feeling you get the first time you nearly lose control of your vehicle on an icy road, that primal fear response. I started thinking about how I was alone and off-duty, armed only with my off-duty sidearm. It crossed my mind that I'd never even had reason to unholster my weapon for anything non-human in my entire career. There was no protocol for this, no training on what to do if you see a giant winged figure perched on top of a radio tower. I stood there for a good 10 seconds, heart pounding, and the creature shifted its head, almost like it was aware I was watching it. That's when the faint reflection of my flashlight caught what appeared to be eyes, or at least eye-like structures, shimmering a dull, reddish color. Not bright red like a taillight, but more of a muted glow, as if the retinas were reflecting my light back at me. I must have flinched or made some noise because the thing suddenly extended its wings slightly, revealing a wingspan that honestly took my breath away. The wings were broad and membranous, but I couldn't make out feathers or anything. It was almost like a mixture of bat-like texture and maybe some ragged edges. The movement caused the radio tower's entire set of cables to rattle. I remember hearing that metal humming and wondering if the structure was safe. Being an officer, you get used to reading subtle cues in people's body language, and while this wasn't a person, I could tell it was deciding whether to stay perched or take off. My gut was screaming for me to get back in the car, but I just froze with the flashlight pointed up. Time hardly seemed to move for a while. My mind was racing through every scenario. Do I call dispatch and report a large, unidentified creature on tower property and risk my reputation? Do I climb up and attempt to investigate? Absolutely not. Do I just slowly back away and pretend I never saw it? It was at this moment I realized the thing was turning its head left and right, as if scanning the horizon, or maybe me, or maybe it was checking for an escape path. In that instant, I remembered an old rumor passed among troopers about bizarre sightings near the Butte Hill mines or down by the old smelter towers in Anaconda, stuff I'd always brushed off. I started to wonder if they might have been telling the truth. Out of nowhere, I heard what sounded like a metallic scrape. I thought maybe it was the tower shifting under the creature's weight. But then I realized it was the sound of the thing's claws as it repositioned. The body language changed, and I swear it looked like it was tensing its legs, preparing for something. That's when my survival instincts kicked in completely, and I started backing up to the driver's side of my car. My heart was thudding so heavily I could hear it in my ears. I slid back in behind the wheel, not even bothering to close the door right away. Just as I reached to slam the door shut, I glimpsed the creature leaping off the tower, wings snapping open. It caught a gust of wind or some sort of updraft because it rose into the air, not gracefully, but powerfully, like a hawk does when it pushes off a branch. I watched it cut across the edge of my headlights toward a darker portion of the sky. I can't gauge exactly how fast it was going, but it was out of my sight in probably 2 or 3 seconds. The entire flight path had a whoosh to it, like the flutter of large sheets. My adrenaline was spiking so bad that I fumbled to get my keys in the ignition, only to realize they were already there. I started the car and waited, scanning the sky for any sign of it, but it was just the dim silhouette of the radio tower. The top light was back to its normal red glow, no flicker. I sat there maybe 2 more minutes, forcing myself to calm down enough to think rationally. It crossed my mind to climb the tower and look for evidence, but I knew that was insane given the circumstances. I ended up driving back to the main highway, taking it slow because my nerves were shot. On the ride home, I kept trying to replay what I saw, questioning everything I'd believed about the natural world. I've pulled more than my share of weird shifts, late nights near the fringes by Glacier National Park or the edges of the Flathead Reservation, but nothing remotely like this. Eventually, I told myself I'd keep my mouth shut because I have a pension to think about, and I don't want to risk my job by spouting off about giant winged creatures. Yet here I am typing all this out because I can't get it off my mind. Every time I see a tall structure now, I find myself scanning the top, half expecting to see that giant silhouette again. It's almost unbearable. I start wondering if it was a bird, if there's some brand new species crossing through Montana, or if it's something else entirely that we just can't explain with normal logic. I haven't breathed a word of this to my family. My cousin even asked me that night why I was so quiet at dinner. I just said I was tired, but the truth is, I feel like I've been let in on some massive secret, that the world isn't quite what it seems. Maybe it's more ephemeral, brimming with unexplained things that only show themselves when circumstances line up just right. I know it might be easy for folks to roll their eyes or call me delusional, especially considering the shaky details, but I trust my training and my senses. I wasn't intoxicated, I wasn't exhausted, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that I saw a huge winged entity perched on that radio tower. The memory of those red, reflective eyes still makes me second-guess every shadow in the evening. I'm not asking you to believe me outright because I realize how insane it sounds. But I saw it. I wish I could say that's all there is to it. But the feeling that something is watching me or is out there with capabilities we don't understand hasn't left me since that night.
Hey, you, listening to this podcast. I know you've worked somewhere before, and that means you've probably got at least one scary experience from that job. So send that scary work story to me at darkstories.org so I can narrate it in a future episode.